beef industry. So we work very closely with U.S. clients and, of course, with consumers as clients of Canadian beef product. Canada Beef was formed a year ago, July, so we're coming up on 18 months, and are the net result of a merger between the Canadian Beef Export Federation and Beef Information Center. So rather than having two entities pulling at the purse strings of checkoff, we're now a highly efficient and consolidated entity whose mandate is to maximize the volume of Canadian beef in our domestic and export markets, while always looking to optimize the value of Canadian beef, because one without the other makes no sense. As you all know, at the end of the day, it's about your opportunity for profit, to stay, to grow, to thrive in this industry. So we accept that as our accountability. Now, we're funded through checkoff principally, as I mentioned, but that also allows us to leverage federal and some provincial monies that then become available to leverage in market. So we're a team of just under 40 folks that are headquartered in Calgary, but we have a significant office in Mississauga as well, and some of us are home-based. I come from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and although it's been the brunt of many a joke, what's a guy from Halifax doing representing the Canadian beef industry, we do have beef producers in the Atlantic region, some of whom are your members as well. And they did tell me when I took the position, it doesn't matter where you live because you'll never be there anyway. So my work is exclusively in the United States, except on instances like this where I get a chance to learn and understand and collaborate with those of us at home. So we have offices in some of our most important export markets. We have folks on the ground in Asia, for example, in Taiwan, in South Korea, and China, and Hong Kong, Macau. We have folks on the ground in Mexico, and again, my accountability is to the largest export market for Canadian product, which comprises about 78% of our beef export, and that's the United States. Now, Bill mentioned earlier some of the reporting about the value of the product that we're exporting into the U.S., so I'll cover some of that in this discussion as well. One of the things, can we just center that up maybe a little bit? I wanted to know before I came, and Ann was kind enough to give me some insights as to the things that would be the most important to cover off in a very short span here today. Because while I'm going to be brief, I think again if we can plant seeds for growing together down the road, they might focus on some of these areas. Being aware of your customers is extremely important in producing the right products from the get-go. Closing the gap and understanding about what's needed in the marketplace, and I think we'll all agree that it is a moving target. We're not addressing the same consumer that we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. In the 90s, we know the trend was very heavily towards lean, and now intramuscular fat has become very important again. So I know that you as producers can grow what it is the consumer wants, and that is your effort, but we've got to be very keenly aware of what are those needs and wants in the marketplace. And ultimately, we're exporting we're an exporting country, and I would like to put forward to you some examples of what's going on in my market right now and why the product goes there. Beef follows money. So why does our product go to the United States? Which products and what type of value do they return to us? And branding ourselves. Canada Beef and the Canadian Beef brand mark, this logo represents our brand position. And on your materials, your website, your brochure and so on, you're very closely connected to the Canadian Beef advantage. So I want to talk about how that acts as a big part of the foundation. First, just some photographs from the United States. This is a retail store in Atlanta, a major metropolitan market, that clearly identifies the Canadian Beef brand mark in case. So what do Americans think of when they think of Canada and Canadians and Canadian food products? We have a very positive persona in the U.S. And research has led us to a very keen understanding of these consumers. Friendly neighbors, world's longest undefended border, clean, pure, and pristine environment. And where better for beef product to come from than from a clean environment? And these perceptions are not misplaced. They're very much an earned proposition. So with country of origin labeling in the United States, I know that it has been very, very difficult for us to manage on the live side. But one of the positives that's come out of country of origin labeling, where the United States at retail have to label the origin of product, Canadian beef has come out of anonymity. We've been commingled in the American meat case for decades and not appreciated for who we are and what we do. So now American consumers have the opportunity to say, you know what, that product worked for me. I'm going to look for it again and again because it performs consistently. This is in Pennsylvania. Southwards of Kissel Hill is a small three-store chain that has built a brand position that they own that includes exclusively Canadian beef product. They offer no other origin in their stores. And here's the proposition, or the what's in it for the customers that they have highlighted as their brand positioning. I don't know where in Ontario that is, maybe Collingwood where the ski hills are, but the imagery that is Canada is very important to put into the mix. It speaks to environment, it speaks to sustainability, it speaks to natural connotations as well. So we can't overlook or underestimate the importance of that perception. Here's an example of a flyer from Southwards, and you can see that on all of the beef products that they represent in all of their materials, at the meat case, in advertising, radio, television, etc., it contains the reference to Canadian beef, and in print, the Canadian beef brand mark. Here's a restaurant in Orlando, Florida that's serving Canadian beef with the Canadian beef brand mark. And here's a food service distributor in Pennsylvania that has built, again, an exclusively Canadian beef program, leveraging the Canadian beef brand mark and all that it represents. Here's the shipper carton with the beef brand mark on it again, and billboards in Pennsylvania with the Canadian beef brand mark. Here's a truck that rolls through the south. There are corridors that roll through southeastern United States from Florida to Texas and north to Virginia, bearing the Canadian beef brand mark. And here's a Hispanic multi-store chain in Utah with Canadian beef proudly positioned in the meat case, and a 6-restaurant chain in Southern California with Canadian beef on the menu. So how does this come about? What is it that Canadian beef represents that's important to these customers? Well, it really starts with the foundation of the Canadian beef advantage, or what we have called in the world of acronyms, the CBA. Internationally recognized genetics. Aha! Well, that's where you come into play. Because we always speak about palatability beginning with genetics. Without genetics, palatability cannot be achieved. And grain feed finishing for outstanding eating quality and for cuttability, or yield performance, or profitability, if we take it to the nth degree. National grading standards that are the most stringent in North America. We grade for A only, youthful maturity. To Matthew's earlier point, he stressed it again and again. Younger animals are more consistently tender. We grade for bright red only meat color, for white only fat color, firm only meat texture, and for muscle conformation. That's the physical structure of that carcass that is the optimal potential for yield performance. So stringent grading standards, safety standards, passive food safety systems that exceed or meet all USDA standards, and an animal identification system that is truly world-class. So it allows for an accurate and a very timely traceback for herd health or human health concerns. And traceback is, again, one of the key words that we see coming forward more and more. Now, the Canadian beef brand, a brand really encompasses everything that we are and everything that we do. And a brand, first and foremost, is a promise. We must deliver on that promise every time, because if we break our word, then it becomes doubly hard to recover our credibility. So that promise helps us position our product with exactly the right customer base. It allows us to qualify, quantify, and then target who we feel would be our best customer. So let me put that into perspective for you. I mentioned that 78% of our export goes to the United States. Hugely important market for us. But for Americans, Canadian beef comprises only 3.5% to 4% of their beef consumption. So with a market of 340 million people, we can afford to be very selective as to who would qualify as a target customer. What would the best customer look like? So we can and need to be very choosy if we're going to optimize the value. We don't want to be and can't afford to be everything to everybody. We need to partner and align and foster and collaborate with those relationships in order to grow that volume and the value. And the brand pillars speak to and support the Canadian beef advantage. Authentically Canadian is a very good thing. We're a leader in beef safety and in cattle production. Oops. I had to start going backwards all of a sudden. Just try this one more time. There we go. Superior meat quality and consistency. There's that word consistency again. And an exceptional eating experience time after time. And beef is a healthy and nutritious choice. In fact, beef contains 14 essential nutrients and vitamins. It's very nutrient rich. And beef is a dense choice, so it satiates or makes us feel full more quickly. So healthcare professionals, dietitians, doctors and so on, are recommending beef as a good choice. And our brand, your brand, needs to represent all of the characteristics that represent a great brand. It needs to be legitimate, positioned to deliver on that promise all the time. It needs to be different. And I heard that earlier in our morning discussions as well, that we need to be very careful that Limousin isn't losing its points of differentiation, especially those characteristics, those traits that are very important to your customer. We need to maybe focus on those, maybe continue to highlight those as attributes that only we can offer. It needs to be relevant. If you're speaking to me as a potential customer, you need to clearly tell me what's in it for me at the end of the day. And consistently deliver on that through all actions and communications ongoingly. So I mentioned to you one of the things that is absolutely fundamental to the Canadian beef advantage is genetics. It's in the Canadian Beef and Veal Handbook, and this is one of the opening slides that we use when we speak to potential client opportunities. So what we say about beef breeds here is that many of Canada's competitors are in warm climates, and they need to incorporate Bos Indicus or Brahman influences into their beef herd. So if they're growing in a warm or subtropical climate, such as would be Texas, such as would be Florida, such as would be Brazil, and so on, Bos Indicus plays a very important role in order to withstand the heat and the parasites that are a part of that type of a climate. In Canada, we have absolutely no limitations as to the genetics that we can choose to incorporate into our beef production. And they are the world's best beef producing breeds. So you can see that our conversation leads to the fact that we export semen and embryos to beyond 75 countries, close to 100 countries in the world, and Limousin is an absolutely integral component to our genetics code. This is the model that we use for branding, and I don't profess that it's the model that you need to follow, but I think the components are pretty much universally important. It needs to start with research and understanding your customers and the markets that you're looking to penetrate. Positioning your brand with a very sound and bulletproof story, one that's able to withstand audit and oversight. Aligning your attributes, your specifications, and then how are you going to get your product to market? Who are your customers and what are their needs and interests? Come up with a merchandising strategy and a marketing plan that supports all of this prior finding, and then communicate it through team training, launch your brand, and continually evaluate if it's doing the things that you need it to be doing. And I commend you for the platform that you have for your brand right now. Your website is very thorough, deep, and complete. It incorporates the Canadian beef advantage as an integral component. And the materials that you've produced, such as this brochure, I'm not sure how recent this is.
Very recent.
This is outstanding. This is outstanding because it does tell your customers what's in it for them. And I know that your customers aren't necessarily always consumers, but I think ultimately we keep that in mind, that consumers are the ones that are moving the needle for us. So when you talk about things that, you know, what separates the Limousin breed is around the convenience traits, the cabinets, the financial contributions to product, like the next slide shows here, the profit opportunity by using the Limousin breed and the genetics that it brings with it to the table. So again, great work, and you've tied it all back to the Canadian Beef Advantage and obviously our ability to service and support you. So I know a lot of things that you don't know. And conversely, nobody likes to know it all. But conversely, at the table and then through the discussions that ensued this morning, I learned a ton in a very short period of time. You obviously know a lot of things that I don't know. Well, who's going to tell me those things that I don't know? Who's going to tell me better than you? So you need to do that in a very loud and a very bold way. My story is around the Canadian Beef Advantage and around the Canadian Beef brand mark and all of the things that it stands for. But the further I can extend my reach, I can't be everywhere at one time. But if I can foster a community of ambassadors that are able to convey the same message, then all of a sudden it takes on a bigger aura. And I've got other people that are answering questions with factual information that aligns with my brand message through, and I heard this from one of the tables, Holly, I think it was your table this morning, the importance of aligning associations, peers, and stakeholders, media partnerships, so that they have the facts that they need to work with. One of the biggest fiascos that was evidenced by the XL Foods E. coli crisis of September, October, and continuing on, was an alignment of media partnerships and the fact that we needed to have the CTVs, the CBCs, the Globe and Mail speaking in factual terms to consumers instead of telling half stories or part truths. Industry retail partnerships, public relations, and online with web and digital engagement. Because today, word travels faster than the speed of light. Via emails and social communities, the messages that are out there, factual or otherwise, are growing leaps and bounds. So ultimately, if we have a whole bunch of people that are able to act as our ambassadors, because we've groomed them as such, then that might be very well serving. Nobody's as credible as you folks. Because when it comes to the consumer, they believe that the farmer, the rancher, is one of the most credible people on the planet. They believe what you do. They know that you're passionate about it. You're the salt of the earth. They will listen to you. We have a new campaign that's just started called Made in Canada, and it features producers. It talks to things like ranching is in our blood. We have a very clear vision. It talks about sustainability. It talks about passion. It talks about animal welfare, care and handling, extremely important here and in global markets. And how beef is a healthy and nutritious choice for you and for your family. So some keystones, but what we're doing is we're third-party credentialing by way of testimonial. I'm not telling you any longer. These folks that do it for a living are telling you the message. And consumers believe. Now our team in the field are soliciting ambassador relationships as we go, whether it's at food show events, or through training and education in front of very influential groups like the American Culinary Federation, like the National Restaurant Association, like the National Grocers Association of America. We're front and center on stage with these folks, and they're inviting us back time and again to help educate and train. And we host trade missions, such as these folks on the bottom are processors out of Baltimore. They're doing further processing. When we bring them here on trade missions, we're not only then telling them about the Canadian Beef Advantage, but we're showing them firsthand. And so folks, Spolight, at your operation at Shouse Land and Cattle, always a great destination to take American visitors. You're welcoming to that, and you do just a wonderful job as our ambassadors of factual information provided in a first-hand, face-to-face way. And we do it on a global scale. This is some of the activity that we have going on in Japan and in Korea, represented here. Cisco in Canada, through their publication, have taken our information as important to their customers and have proliferated the message to a reach of 30,000 restaurant owner-operators and chefs across the country. We've leveraged by giving them exactly what they want. You know, they're looking for recipes, they're looking for consumer tips about cooking, and so on, through this proactive media outreach to reach 2.1 million Canadians with our message, and an ad value, if we'd had to pay for that, of $74,000 built on what it is that they buy and knitting it all together. So any way that we can figure that folks are going to look for Canadian beef or beef options, we're trying to point them in that direction through our social network community. This is our Canadian consumer site. So it has areas like buying beef, how to make the right selection at the grocery store, preparing and cooking, choosing the right cut, proper roasting methodology, but always with a link to our social network or community. And that continues to grow our footprint. All of these things pointing back to Canadian beef. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, which is a compilation of photographs of Canadian beef products that people have cooked, and they want to share it with the world. LinkedIn, and bloggers and brand ambassadors. So it's a question of trust. 78% of consumers trust peer recommendations versus pure advertising. So again, we're getting other people to deliver our message in a very credible way. 34% of bloggers post opinions about brands and products, and 25% of search results today on the internet are generated by user-generated content. And over 50% of women have purchased a product based on a blog recommendation alone. So these are folks that work for Canada Beef. They're very active on Twitter and they're getting the message out, which again extrapolates upon itself as we share this within our own group of friends and family. I see that you have a Facebook page and you have an awful lot of likes on there as well. So think about content and think about how you're going to get that content shared. And visit the Canada Beef Facebook page as well if you'd like to see how it is that we're doing that particular job.